Welcome to Not Another Greek History Podcast, the podcast that aims to be exactly what it says. I'm your host, Onúfiros Dovletis, and together we'll discover the not-so-frequently told stories of Greece's history that will change the way you view things forever. So now we're getting to some statues that were called the Caryatids of Thessaloniki, also referred to as Elgins of Thessaloniki, or the Enchanted of Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki, by the way, is Greece's second largest city and named after the sister of Alexander the Great, and it's also my hometown. So I have, of course, a really big connection to the city. I really love it, but not so many of you ever go there, unfortunately. It would be very close to where Alexander the Great was born, so you can see a lot of antiquities that you couldn't possibly see in Athens. It's, of course, in northern Greece, in the region that we call Macedonia. That would be Macedonia, of course. These female statues were made probably in the 2nd century AD, and they would be 4 pillars with sculptures on both sides. They would have been on a building in the market of the city. In total, we're talking about 8 sculptures practically. So in 1864, a year after the removal of the statue of Nike, a French historian called Emmanuel Millet, with orders of Napoleon, he wants the whole building. Millet had also tried to take artifacts from nearby Mount Athos. That would be a peninsula with 20 monasteries. The monks didn't give him anything, so he looted some antiquities from another island that is nearby, and it's called Thassos. Of course, permission was granted to them by the Turks. The local population of Thessaloniki, nevertheless, reacts to all of this, and Millet wrote back then that he was surprised because the Turks often shot the sculptures for fun, and the Jewish owner of the adjacent house would sometimes break pieces of the monument and sell them to tourists. Ironically now, they're also known as Las Encantadas, which is funny that we have a Spanish name because that is due to the Sephardic Jewish population of the city who had been expelled from Spain in the 15th century and ended up in the Ottoman Empire and mainly in Thessaloniki. So they used a Spanish name because it has to do with the Jewish people. The Jewish people, though, sold pieces of that to whoever found themselves in the city. They were called Enchanted because of a popular tradition of the Greek people, which goes back to ancient times and Alexander the Great. They said that the monument once connected with the palace of Alexander the Great. When a nearby king visited Thessaloniki, his wife fell in love with Alexander, and they met secretly through this portico with the statues. There were no statues back then. When the king found out, he ordered for a magic spell to be cast on the building so that anyone who passed from there would be petrified. The king's wife, along with her maid, showed up there at night to meet Alexander and were petrified, but so did the king with his wizard when they went to see what actually happened. Alexander, though, was the one who didn't show up because his tutor Aristotle had warned him not to go. And that's how people explained eventually those male and female figures that we see to this day in Paris, as I told you. They're still in the Louvre. Greece has been trying to get them back, but of course without success. Now we're going to another Greek island, the island of Kypros, that would be Cyprus in English, which now officially, though, is a separate country. It was never reunited with the rest of Greece. And from 1864, we go to 1865. The biggest smuggler of antiquities for Cyprus would be an Italian again. We didn't hear about them for a few minutes, and I'm sure you were worried if they were doing okay. But of course, they came back in the 1860s. That would be Luigi Palma di Cesnola, and now this is getting better. He was the ambassador of the United States on the island during the Turkish occupation. So we're talking about the 1860s, 1865 to 1877, when Cyprus is still part of the Ottoman Empire. Mind you that the next year, precisely the next year, 1878, Cyprus will be under British occupation. So the Americans, with their ambassador just on time, they go to Cyprus and they try to loot as much as possible. Cesnola even describes all his achievements, let's say, in a book that he published in 1877, and it's called Cyprus, its ancient cities, tombs, and temples. The thing is that he destroyed many archaeological sites. He didn't just take antiquities, because back then we have to imagine these people are tomb raiders in a way. Let's say they raid the temples, the sites, and all that. They don't excavate properly. They're not scientists. And he even destroyed many tombs that had never been touched by anyone for thousands of years. Eventually, he transferred to the United States over 35,000 artifacts, which he sold for $100,000. That would have been a huge amount of money in the 1860s. And he sold those artifacts to the Met. And the Met made him its first director. The first director of the Met, which had just been established in 1872, was a smuggler of antiquities. I think people have gotten something really, really wrong regarding the function, the point, the goal, the mission of the museums. The museums are not supposed to loot places and have trophies in them. They're supposed to promote art and culture. The Met began really, really wrong, as you can see. And finally, we're going to the 20th century. In World War II, Greece is attacked by... No need to wonder about this. I always ask this question at the Acropolis, and people never get it right. It was attacked by the Italians. People always tell me the Germans. And I always say, not the ones who got the blame for World War II, but Greece was attacked by the ones who got away with World War II. So Mussolini, the Italians, attacked Greece in 1940, in October 1940. They lose the war, and then that's why eventually the Germans have to come to Greece to help them out. So the Germans, the Italians as well, and the Bulgarians in northern Greece, they sometimes destroy ancient sites, they destroy antiquities, and sometimes they excavate without permission, of course, and without us having no clue what they actually did, what they found, and what they took. And they take many of those antiquities and they send them to Hitler as presents, because they want to suck up to the Führer of the Third Reich. Some of those people who smuggled antiquities from Greece, I think it's ridiculous. It's kind of, I'm laughing because I think it's so ridiculous. Some of those people even had the audacity to come back as archaeologists and work in Greece. I don't know how on earth Greece or whatever other place allowed those things to happen, but they happened. Anyway, keep in mind, guys, that until the 70s, when it comes to those stolen antiquities that we mentioned, stuff that would have been taken to the Met, to Boston, or whatever museums, there was not so much research that was done. They were not really trying hard to make things official and to make things legitimate as well. There was mainly a problem, and that's really, really funny now. There was mainly a problem for the antiquity when it was a statue, for example, let's say, if it was over 1 meter. That's when eventually, in the 70s, they made the UNESCO agreement, and that's when the regulations became more strict. The biggest private collectors, let's say, would be Levi White, George Ortiz, who had the biggest, or has the biggest collection of bronze antiquities after Greece's National Archaeological Museum. Biggest bronze collection in the world outside of Greece is owned by a person called George Ortiz. Then it would be another private collector called Borowski, who created in Jerusalem a museum, the Museum of the People of the Bible. A lot of those collections eventually were exhibited by famous museums, such as the Met or the Royal Academy in London. That was a way for those private collectors to make those collections that they had kind of legitimate in a way, because they were displayed after a while in some famous museum, or not even a famous museum, but they would appear in some catalog in the end. 10 years ago, let me tell you that the Met still had no acquisitions code, so they would keep buying practically illegal antiquities. In the 70s, the Met bought for $1 million one of the greatest Greek works of art ever found, an object that is called the Crater of Euphronius. Kratir, crater, you say in English, means mixing bowl, where they mixed wine with water. So imagine a big ceramic vase. Also, the Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles has bought quite a lot of Greek antiquities, and we'll get to them at some point. It was common that actually archaeologists were involved in the selling of the antiquities, so it wasn't just those foreign people that would take stuff. Locals had to work with them, of course. Nevertheless, many archaeologists were approached by illicit diggers who usually had even found more impressive artifacts and were sometimes generous enough to just give them away to the archaeologists. That's unbelievable. It's really, really funny. They had gone through the trouble of finding those things, and then they would go to the archaeologist and they would brag about that. And they would say, let me see what you found. Only that? That's no big deal. I have something more impressive. And the next day, an archaeologist actually said she found some artifacts practically waiting for her at the excavation site as a gift. So nice of them. We know of a case near the site of Nemea in southern Greece, Nemea, known from the story of Hercules and the Nemean lion, if you've heard of that myth, where Greek illicit diggers would dig for months, and there were even gangs that fought each other, and eventually that caught the attention of the police. Of course, everyone knew that this was happening, but eventually it kind of got out of control, and that's why the police had to stop it. A lot of those antiquities ended up in New York through Switzerland, and now we hear about a different country which has to do a lot with smuggling of antiquities. Switzerland. Those antiquities came from a village near Nemea. They actually have been returned, and they're now exhibited in the Archaeological Museum of Nemea. Let's see what the biggest Greek dealer of antiquities would have been, who even had his own gallery. It was some man from Crete, as his surname suggests, called Nikolaos Koutoulakis. Nikolaos Koutoulakis. For Italy, it was Giacomo Medici. In his warehouses alone, they found 10,000 objects. Keep in mind the name Medici. It might be, I'm not sure about this, because I'm sure it must be a very common surname in Italy, or it's funny anyway, that he has the same surname as the famous 15th century Medici family from Florence, who were patrons of the arts and wanted artifacts. And they had, as I told you earlier, this man that was called Kyriakos of Ancona bring antiquities to them from Greece. And we have a Medici, even in 2004, 600 years later, still being a smuggler of antiquities. So in 2004, Giacomo Medici was sentenced to 10 years in prison and a fine of 10 million euros, which was the largest penalty ever for an antiquities crime in Italy. Keep in mind, though, that 10 million euros, I think, is a joke for smugglers. Other people involved in those smuggling of antiquities networks and crimes, they would be the former Paul Getty Museum curator of antiquities Marion True and American antiquities dealer Robert Hecht. The Getty Museum purchased an ancient Greek male statue for at least $9 million in the 80s. That's why I told you 10 million euros is not a big deal as a penalty. They would make a lot of money. And that statue was either made around 530 BC, or it's supposed to be a modern forgery. The museum website reads, neither art historians nor scientists have been able to completely resolve the issue of the Getty Museum Kouros' authenticity. Kouros is the word for any male statue made in ancient Greece. Kouros, the young man. Certain elements of the statue have led to this questioning. Yet the anomalies of the Getty Kouros, because officially the statue is called Getty Kouros, imagine that. The anomalies of the Getty Kouros may be due more to our limited knowledge of Greek sculptures in this period, rather than to mistakes on the part of a forger. In 2018, though, the statue was removed from view because Getty director Timothy Potts said it's fake, so it doesn't help to show it along with authentic material. I have a feeling, though, that it's original, because it seems that the process of aging the marble, which is the main problem about this whole thing, the process of the aging of the marble, I think it would be way too complicated to reproduce by anyone in the 80s or even now. The biggest dealer of antiquities in the world, though, after all these people that we mentioned, after Nikolaos Koutoulakis from Greece and Giacomo Medici from Italy, it was, who could it possibly be? Not even the Italians could be there. The British. It had to be a British person. So the biggest dealer of antiquities in the world was probably, anyway, but I think it was the British Robin Symes, whose name came up in many, many cases and was practically the core of this network of smuggling antiquities. He had roughly 30 storage facilities in London, New York, and Switzerland, of course. There were objects that were initially bought for less than 1 million and ended up being sold for 30 million euros or whatever, dollars. That's why I told you 10 million euros as a fine for a smuggler. It's not a big deal. He was in this together with his long-term Greek partner, Christos Michailidis. They were a couple and partners in crime. Symes was convicted in 2005, but investigations continued for several years. Keep in mind, he died last year in 2023, only a few months ago, before I made this podcast. His collection was estimated to be worth at least 125 million pounds, which means way more than $130 million or something. That's what I'm going to say again. $10 million for penalty was nothing. 125 million pounds. That's unbelievable. Also, in the early 90s, several Greek museums were actually robbed. The smugglers, this crime, the network of smuggling antiquities and all this went even that far as to rob museums in Greece. It wasn't just one or two, it was several. The heist at the Museum of Corinth was the biggest one ever. The antiquities of Corinth had not been sold for at least 7 years, because we shouldn't imagine that you just rob something and then you can sell it in the next days or months or whatever. Those things have to stay hidden, to lay low for a while, and then eventually they might be sold, or they would be sold. 7 years later, at least, they show up eventually in New York and Miami. So we can see that it's mainly an American market that has interest for those antiquities. If you ever visit the Corinth Museum on your own or with me, look for the head of Dionysus, the god of wine, whose nose broke as he was being smuggled out of the building in the 90s. Several cases involved auction houses such as Christie's and Sotheby's, which means they were the ones practically supporting those networks of the smuggling of antiquities, because they sold them and of course they made money. Sotheby's specifically has been proven to have been actively involved in the illicit antiquities trade. Keep in mind, again, what I'm telling you comes from books, from reporters, from documentaries, and so on. Some changes regarding laws are also happening over the past years, finally, in England and in Switzerland, which will make it harder for smuggling. The country that is really trying to get back in stolen antiquities is mainly, and that's really funny, Italy. The ones who have been looting Greece since antiquity, they try to get antiquities back more than anyone else, which is great for them. I salute them for that. For some reason, the Greek governments have not been very active, probably because Greece is the small and powerless country that it is. But I think it might be because sometimes the people who are in charge are simply useless and they don't really bother. The Getty, the Met in New York, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston have eventually returned antiquities both to Greece and Italy. A lot of this information that I mentioned comes from a book and a documentary by Andreas Apostolidis. Andreas Apostolidis. You can look for this online, maybe to find the book, maybe find the documentary. Last but not least, I want to read to you one of my past clients' emails regarding their own antiquities collection. And I'm going to leave you with that. Dear Onufrios, I'm sure you would not remember me, but you guided us for 2 days in 2022. We learned so much from you, especially about antiquities being taken from Greece. When I got home, I decided that I would return a rare item to Greece. I have collected helmets for about 25 years. The pride of my collection is a Greek helmet known incorrectly as an Illyrian type because the first examples were found there from 500 BC. I have just recently contacted my congressman, blah blah blah, who connected me with the Greek consul general in nearby Tampa, Florida. Florida, keep in mind, was involved also in a lot of the smuggling cases. We have arranged for the helmet to be returned as my gift to Greece, where it belongs. Your Ministry of Culture is arranging it to go to Athens, where it will be featured in a display in May. May has passed, by the way, already. It's June, as I told you, at the Archaeological Museum, along with other important antiquities that have recently been returned to Greece. I am attaching the write-up and photos of the helmet so that you can know a little bit about it and see what it looks like. It might have been worn at Marathon or Thermopylae, as you say, or in any number of battles waged between Greek city-states and the Persians, roughly in 480 BC. I wanted you to know that it was you who first inspired me to return this helmet to its home. I hope you will visit it at the museum one day and take pride in the role you played in getting the helmet 2,500 years after it was made home to Greece. With all best wishes. Thank you for listening. Thank you all for joining me on this amazing journey through history. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. And please share. Until next time, this is Onufrios Dovletis signing off from Not Another Greek History Podcast.